My name is Samuel Owusu, and today I'll be talking about transition from SSIS to Azure Data Factory, aka ADF. And when I started this, when they told me I'll be doing this, I started diving into ADF because I'm an SSIS guy. So the transition, reading about it and stuff like that. Prior to me doing this, I assumed, ADF was going to replace SSIS down the road. But just from the research and reading that I've done, even if that will happen, it's not anytime soon, at least. And ADF and SSIS, when it's compared, Microsoft Integration Services, aka SSIS, is a platform for building enterprise-level data integration and data transformation solutions. So basically, SSIS is the ETL tool, and Microsoft came out with it in 2005. Prior to that, they used to have a tool in SQL 2000 called DTS, and then it revolved to SQL 2005 to SSIS. And I know many of you are familiar with SSIS, and how SSIS works is you develop it in Visual Studio or data tools. You develop a solution, and inside the solution is a project, and then inside the project is packages and data sources, and then inside the packages are tasks and control flow and like data flow tasks that you drag and drop to move and transform data from one source to the other. You can do more than just ETL, transform and load. You can do a lot of file related tasks and things of that nature with it. And inside the control flow, like I was saying, is the source, transformation, and destination. That's inside the data flow task. But inside the control flow, they have other tasks like file system task, Windows task scheduler, and other tasks that you can use in automation. And they also have connection managers. But compared to ADF is in the cloud, and you don't need Visual Studio or data tools to program in ADF. I will show you guys down the road how, in terms of comparisons, the similarities and then the differences between the two. And then also with SSIS, you have parameters and expressions and variables and event handlers that can handle like errors and configurations, and also for login and log providers. And this here is an example of an SSIS package where, on the left-hand side, you can do the login in there. You can do a whole lot. It's not just, a migration of data. You can do inside the data flow task, you can do transformations and all kinds of other transformation stuff with it. And with ADF, it's a little different. It's cloud-based, like I was saying at the beginning, and it allows you to create data-driven workflows in the cloud for orchestration and automation, data movements, and data transformation. So basically, it's an orchestration tool, and it's a platform as a service, and it's offered in Azure, and it was released in 2015. And inside the ADF, you have link service, which is very similar to like a data source in SSIS. And you have the data sets, pretty much similar to like the control flow. And then the pipelines, I will show you guys a sample of it. Just one moment. Yes, this is ADF. These are what I'm talking about. For example, you create the data sets here. Let me just I'll just use an existing one. Cancel. You can create these are the data sources you can select from. For example, let's do a blog. You can pretty much you create like a link service, and then inside the link service, you create your data set using the link service, and then you use that to build the pipeline. SSIS is different. It uses the control flow to, in terms of build out your precedence and sequence, which goes first, and then inside the data flow tab is where you do your transformations. All right, back to ADF, and like I was showing you guys, the link service defines the connection properties, and the data set is pointed to the data you want to process, have processed, sometimes defining the schema. Pipelines, it combines the data sets and activities and define an execution schedule. And then the data management gateway allows you to retrieve data from an on-premise data source. And then inside the ADF solution, you have your pipeline, your data sets, and then your data sets flow through the activities. And that's how it orchestrates the data, and the data is consumed and produced. And the pipelines are logical groupings of activities. And this is an example of how the ADF pipeline looks like. I showed you guys in the portal. And it's very similar to SSIS in terms of the precedent constraints, and if you want it to execute based on completion or success or failure, you can do the same things as you can do in SSIS. And in terms of similarities with SSIS component, it has the connection managers, and ADF use something called link service, which is reusable. You can have like, for example, a storage link service used for multiple like blobs or multiple files. And they have the source destination, which is the data set. It's similar to the data set if you're familiar with SSIS. And the package is similar to the pipeline, and the activity is similar. It's like similar to a task in ADF. And it's not the same. People usually say, ADF and SSIS, yes, they are similar, but they are also different. And both can copy data to and from Azure. With SSIS, with other components, you can copy data to and from Azure, and they can both fire up HD inside cluster and run Hive and take scripts. And they both role-based security, and they both have login. It's different, but they both have some kind of login mechanism, and you can automate both with Demo, PowerShell, or .NET. And in terms of dependencies, They both have dependencies. On the right-hand side is ADF, and then on the left-hand side is SSIS. In terms of the data flow, you cannot do a lot of you can do transformation in ADF. You can do it, but you have to use stored procedures and other jobs to do it. Unlike SSIS, where you can just use like transformation components to do transformations within like a data flow task. And with SSIS, it can be used, like I was saying earlier, as a data orchestration tool. And people do more than just use SSIS to execute a stored procedure. But with ADF, to do your transformation, the easiest way, or at least one of the easiest way I found out, is by using stored procedures or some kind of Hive job or calling a job to do the transformations. And then in terms of the differences, again, ADF usually used for extract, load to, as opposed to ETL. So ADF is pretty much an ELT tool. It doesn't really handle transformation like generically like SSIS does. And ADF is cloud-based, like I was saying earlier. You do all your editing within Azure portal. So it doesn't require a lot of hardware. It doesn't require any hardware or installation. It's all in the cloud. So, and ADF is the pay-as-you-go subscription offered in Azure. With SSIS, you have to get alliances, cost, and then hardware. You have to factor all that when using SSIS. And like I was saying earlier, with ADF, they don't have no built-in transformations, and their error handling is not like SSIS, where you see the red marks when you're missing a data source or a column changes. With ADF, troubleshooting is a little difficult in comparison to SSIS. And SSIS has a more GUI friendly. Well, it's debatable. Some say ADF has, some prefer ADF GUI, but I like the SSIS GUI. It's more user friendly in terms of intelligence and debugging. ADF has just a basic editor and no intelligence or debugging. They have debugging, but it doesn't, in terms of troubleshooting, I find SSIS debugging easier to do than in ADF. And ADF uses like JSON scripts, similar to how SSIS uses like expressions and stuff like that in orchestrating. And with something I've also seen with SSIS in comparison with ADF is that SSIS has a lot of sources in data sources, and also just incorporating like third-party components in there. With ADF, you have to use the data sources in there. If not, you have to write some scripts in PowerShell to handle data sources or to pull data or do automation if it doesn't exist in the generic like activities. And in terms of the differences, again, ADF is requires no infrastructure, so it's easier to implement and spin one up, and it's easier to scale out, unlike SSIS where you have to plan it, deploy it, configure it, and all that. And with the JSON, the ADF JSON is easier to source control. You can implement like source control in there with the GUI that's created in the XML for SSIS. And in terms of pricing, SSIS is not sold separately. It comes with SQL Server, and the standard pricing, this is as of 2019, is 3,717 per core enterprise, and it's 14,256 per core for the enterprise, and the standard is 3,717. And Azure, on the other hand, is a pay as you go. So you can pause it if you're not using it, and it's easier to implement. And you can do a demo with it. With SSIS, I guess you can download the developer edition and try and spin up or do a demo with that. But with ADF, it's easier to, program or use in terms of pricing. And I have the pricings here. If you compare SSIS to ADF, you can scale up or down in terms of business needs and the amount of data and DTU that is being used. And just learning about ADF, I feel like ADF, you have to be a full stack developer. It's not just like SSIS where you can just drag and drop, and you can do SSIS with limited coding. But with ADF, you have to know it's easier. You can implement in PowerShell and other languages like Spark, Hive. It gels well with other languages, unlike SSIS, which really gels well with mainly .NET, like C# and Visual Basic language. And ADS can handle different types of data, big data, tabular, or structured data, unlike SSIS, where the data has to be relational or structured. And ADF also have, in terms of the data flow, it has like abstract, which is something SSIS don't have. You have to do like an update and then an insert and a lookup. With ADF, to have other cool features in terms of ADF mapping through the data flows and the derived column patterns and schema drift, which creates the ability to ingest data when the source schema is unknown or changes. If your source schema changes in SSIS, it will error out, creating like a domino effect. But unlike ADF, you can, use the schema drift to dynamically do some mapping. So ADF is more dynamic, depending on what you are trying to do. If you're not doing a lot of transformation and just dealing more with data loading, they both have their advantages and disadvantages. And the debug mode allows you to view your data. The debug mode, ADF allows you to view your data as you develop your pipeline. This is especially useful when working with some of the more complex transformations to ensure the results of those transformations meet your expectations. So turning on debug mode starts up a cluster that it uses for your ADF mapping data flows. And unlike the SSIS, debugging, there's a limit you can debug, but you have to go to, for example, let me show. You have to go when you do the debugging. If you get an error, you have to go through like the event handlers and the package explorer to see where it errored out, or you can just view the GUI. Usually, where it errored out will have an X here. Unlike ADF, the data sources can be dynamic, but in the data flow tags in SSIS, it cannot be that dynamic because the metadata we have to map the metadata. So if the data doesn't exist in the source or the metadata column or whatever you're trying to map doesn't exist in either one, you may not be able to use the data flow task. But in ADF, their mapping is more dynamic because of the schema drift. And if you're looking for ADF, it's more of a rich interface that allows a drag and drop ETL experience for your modern data platform solutions. The mapping flows is a great option. There isn't much of a learning curve if you coming from SSIS background, and it's coding free experience. So you don't need to be a heavy coding in terms of skills to use ADF. And I think of ADF as a complementary service to SSIS, with its main case confined to inexpensively dealing with big data in the cloud. And let me see if I can. For example, in terms of if guys who aren't familiar with how the ADF works, if this was SSIS, this would be kind of similar to like a data flow task, you know, the source and then the destination. They call it sync destination in ADF, and then you do the mapping. And this is the part where you can do like the dynamic mapping where it doesn't do the validation till runtime. And in terms of the precedence constraint, it's very similar to the one in SSIS. You drag and drop, and then you tell it if to do it for completion or failure or whatnot. And then the debug, you use this as the debug too. But in SSIS, for example, if you delete the data source, it will have an X here where you can it's easier to troubleshoot. But here, you have some of the errors you wouldn't see it till runtime. Or sometimes even it will run and an error might occur, but you may not be able to see it. In terms of the error logging mechanism, SSIS is very user-friendly. But in terms of using like other like unstructured data and stuff like that, you can ADF has a lot of in terms of connecting to Spark, Hive, machine learning, and doing all kinds of MapReduce stuff that SSIS. Well, it depends. The new version of SSIS, you can do some of these with third-party components, but with ADF, you don't have to install all these third-party components to handle some of these tasks. Some of them already come with it. So, and in terms of just the data, the transformation part is where it's not as robust as the transformation in SSIS, where you can do a whole lot more within the transformation, within the data flow task in terms of transformation. Do anybody has any questions?
Hey Sam, if you look over to your right-hand side on your control panel there, you can see the questions. It's like a little drop down, or I can read them off for you, however you want to go about it. Sam, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Yes, somebody asked a question if I can talk about the data lineage. Just bear with me real quick. I'm trying to show all the questions that they asked. Okay. Yes. ADF. Somebody asked the question: is ADF accessible through web browsers? Yes. Almost every web browser, you can log into Azure portal where ADF is accessible through. I'm using Chrome, and when you go to like the portal, it's available through Data Factory, and you select on the Data Factory, and then pretty much you post it up in the web browser. You can use Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Internet Explorer. And the next question is based on node size. Venkat's question is not it's not a complete question. He just said based on node size, so I don't know what his question is. Both are developed using Visual Studio in one of the slides. No, one is developed in Portal and one is SSIS is developed in Visual Studio. Both are not developed in Visual Studio. Yes, and the other question I see, for some reason, the questions are not showing up bigger. It's very tiny. We all need to install runtime. Configuration is suspension. Can I use SSIS to push data from on-prem to Azure? Yes, you can even run SSIS on ADF. You can bring your packages to ADF, and then you can execute or run your SSIS packages. So yes, you can use SSIS to push data from on-prem to Azure, but it's easier to just do it in Azure. It's easier to do it in ADF, is in terms of just migrating the data or moving the data to the cloud or pushing the data to the cloud. Are there any other questions? Any transformations are done only in SQL? Please elaborate on the external sources, plugins that exist, how to see what is available. Okay, to see what's available in terms of sources, you can create a new data set, and then in terms of sources, depending on what source you are trying to use, you can use Azure Source, Blob, Cosmos DB, Azure Data Lake, Postgres, Azure Postgres. You can use Azure SQL Database. There are tons of sources, data sources to use. You can also use on-prem data sources, DB2, Amazon Redshift. I mean, it's a lot of data sources you can use. The same with files. You can pull from FTP, SFTP. You can even do pull from a website. And please, would you say ADF is more of a big data processing tool than understanding ETL? Yes, ADF can process big data and unstructured data better than SSIS, but it all depends on the DTU. You know, it all depends on the resources that or the type of subscription that you're using. The more the DTU, well, and the more parallel, if you using parallelism and stuff like that, you can process data faster in ADF. But depending on the machine you're running SSIS onto, you can also do it at a similar speed. But with the SSIS, the bigger the machine and stuff like that, the more expensive it is. Unlike ADF, you can use it to process data or do some kind of like data migration or analytics. And then after, if you just need it for a short amount of time. But with SSIS, once you purchase the hardware, it's not like you can return it after using it. So ADF is more in terms of scalability. Okay. And Sarita wanted to know, okay, I've answered it, the question. Let me bring the questions here. All right. I answered this one. It's accessible through the web. Any transformations are done only in SQL store procedures. Well, that's one of the main ways to do the transformations, but you can also do them through jobs like high jobs or other data lake jobs. And then both are developed. Okay, I answered this one or made the correction. But we need SSIS, which is expensive. Both can combine. Can I push SSIS from here? Yes, I answered this one already. Can we move Excel files in ADF without file conversion using SSIS? Yes, you can. You can do that with the ADF, especially if it's in the blob storage. It's easier in terms of selecting the column delimiters and stuff like that. Is very intelligent in terms of picking it up, unlike SSIS. And we parameterize in ADF. Yes, you can do that with the but you have to be familiar with JSON a little bit. Unlike SSIS, you can parameterize and also use expressions, which is a little different in terms of the one in ADF. ADF, the parameterization is through like modifying the JSON part. Can you SSIS or ADF to move data from Azure DB to on-prem? With the SQL 2019, I haven't tried it out, but they do have components where you can use that to pull the data from Azure to like an on-prem. And can you talk a little bit about the data lineage? I saw in one of the slides. I talked about it again already. And does the ADF have capability of creating a pipeline to send files to SFT server? Yes, it does. George, does ADF have capability of creating a pipeline to send files to SFT? Okay, yes, it does. And does source data have to be in the cloud before you can use ADF? Well, it depends, but it doesn't have to be in the cloud. For example, if you're pulling data from on-prem, it's not in the cloud, but it will still work. If you're using a flat file, you have to upload it to the blob or the storage in the cloud and then process it. From the pricing chart, ADF is more expensive the more you use it. Yes, it depends. ADF, let's say you just want to store data for analytics and stuff like that. You're not really doing a lot of computing on there. Your cost will vary with ADF because it's based on DTUs. Unlike SSIS is based on like memory and core and stuff like that. But at least with ADF, you can scale up as the data gets bigger, and you can scale down as the data gets smaller. And you can also pause the service. As Microsoft or any third party considered providing migration to convert SSIS packages to ADF? Well, it's not straightforward. You can't just convert SSIS packages to ADF. You can, however, migrate or run SSIS packages in ADF. But it's not some of the things SSIS does. ADF is not, for example, with transformations and other tasks. ADF is not as straightforward, but you can migrate depending if it's not a complex package that requires some kind of third-party component. You can execute it in ADF. How ADF deployments work? Well, with ADF deployments are very straightforward. With ADF, you don't really deploy it to, let's say, like a SQL server, similar to how you do in SSIS, where you deploy it. You can publish it, after you create your data sources, pipelines, and stuff like that. You can publish it. Okay. I'm trying to get the questions. All right. And how do you use ADF to load on-prem data? And see what sort of security implications is there. You have to create a data source to connect to the on-prem. Let me see if I have an example of it. They have the connections, for example, on-prem. You put in there, you have to kind of work with your infrastructure team in terms of firewalls and stuff like that. And then once you configure it, you can connect to your on-prem database or on-prem SQL server. But yes, it is, security risk in terms of, I guess, the firewall. But that's something that you have to work with your infrastructure team on. How easy is it to upload already developed packages to ADF? If the packages are not complex or use any third-party like tools, you can, pick it up, drop it in ADF, or you can execute it in ADF. It's straightforward. How easy is it to upload already developed packages to ADF? How is the configuration done, like source and destination connections? Okay, this one in ADF, you do the configuration. Just bear with me. Okay. In ADF, pretty much, let's say you want to move data, you select, I'll just use an existing data source, data set. In terms of, I can, this is pretty much like a data flow task. You create your source, you can just create a new source, select what source you would like to use, pull the data from, and then the sink is like your destination. Pretty much similar to the data flow task connection managers. You can use existing connections here. These are the existing connections I currently have. Or you can create your own or new connections. And then after you get your source and destination, you do the map. With SSIS, you have your source destination, and then in between these two, you can do all kinds of transformations here. But with ADF, with the source, let's say I'm pulling from, let me see, say I'm pulling from SQL Server, Azure SQL Server. I can write a query or store procedure, and then inside the store procedure, I can do transformations, convert tasks or derive columns. I could write that as part of the SQL code script. But with SSIS, you don't even have to do that. You can just pull from the table or the query, and then before it gets to the destination, which is called the sink, you can it has like all types of transformations that you can do before it gets to the destination where you do the mapping. Is the permission given to the tables? I do not understand this question. Christian Gada, I do not get the question. When you say how is permission given to the tables, do you mean ADF tables that is pulling like the data source or destination, or are you talking SSIS? All right. Yes, new questions. Yeah. When will you be able to handle SFTP and SFTP? That's all. Well, ADF does handle SFTP and FTP. For example, if you go to the sources or destinations and you do new and you select file, you can do FTP, SFTP, HTTP. You can even make API calls, you know, or the file system, or it can connect to Google Cloud Storage and Amazon S3. So does ADF now support business logic and calling packages? Well, with ADF it's different. You can call another package, but I guess it's not like SSIS where it has the master and child packages. With ADF, you use the precedence constraint just like SSIS to run the task in the sequence. I use Task Factory Professional. How do those tools work in ADF? Well, most of the Task Factory stuff, component, ADF has like the upstart and stuff like that. ADF uses that, but it doesn't use Task Factory. You can use third-party components in ADF, at least not to my knowledge. You can write or code or write some scripts in PowerShell or something, but you can't use like with SSIS. You can just install a third-party component like Cozy Rock or like Task Factory. With ADF, it doesn't work like that. Okay. See new questions. In ADF, how are users managed? Users are managed by their resources. I don't know if you're familiar with Azure ADF, but for example, the resource groups. So I created the ADF within that resource groups. So it's all managed within that resource groups. SQL or DB account permission is used for destination table for result. Is it correct? It's used for destination table. Well, ADF handles in terms of the permission in ADF. SQL or DB account permission is used for destination table from ADF. Is it correct? Well, you don't create the SQL account, but ADF has like an account that the account that you're running under. It's a SQL account. Yes. So depending on the data source, let's say you're connecting to. Let me go to my connections. I created one to connect to my on-prem. I'm using a SQL Server account, with Windows authentication. So you can use Windows authentication, or you can use a SQL Server account to connect. So yes, that's correct, Nkada. Yes. I believe this webinar is being recorded. Any other questions?
All right. Looks like you have answered all of the questions. I don't see any more popping up. All right, perfect. All right, thank you so much, Sam, for hosting this webinar. We really appreciate your time and coming out to host this, well, or coming online to host this. We really appreciate it. And as for everybody else, like Sam also stated, yes, this is recorded. You guys will receive a recording in your inbox, in your email inbox tomorrow around noon. So look forward to that. If you guys want to view any of our past webinars or in our current ones currently, you guys can visit our YouTube channel at Pragmatic Works, and you guys can go under the free training playlist, and you guys will see all of our past and present webinars. Again, Sam, thank you so much for hosting. If you guys have any questions until then or after, please feel free to reach out to Sam or myself. We'll be happy to help. I want to thank you guys again for joining, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon. Thank you, Sam, again. We appreciate it.
No problem.